Hey guys, it's me again, Michael. I hope you're ready for our next topic. Today we're going to talk about a very exciting topic. We are going to dive very deeply into some theoretical concepts. Today's stuff is going to be a little bit theoretical, more theoretical than what most of our topics are. As we proceed in this course, you're going to see it gets more and more practical because we're not really interested in theories. We want to find out what works. But we do need a little bit of theoretical background, so today we're going to dive into two major schools, two different ideas, two different camps of where a strategic advantage might come from, or a sustainable competitive advantage might come from. Although they are different ways of looking at the world, they're both explaining the same thing, how a company might be able to make a sustainable competitive advantage above normal profits over an extended period of time in the face of competition. Okay, so let's get right into it then. Last time I had mentioned that there are two possible sources of competitive advantage. Now, I'm going to give you just a very brief history here of strategic management. Strategic management is actually a pretty new subject. It hasn't been around that long. It hasn't been around as long as accounting, psychology, economics. It's really a mid-21st century phenomenon. Can someone tell me when the first MBA degree was awarded? Somebody said 1920? No, not that early. 1940? No, later than that. Yeah, that's it, 1950. It was 1950 that the first MBA degree was awarded. And so business schools, believe it or not, are a pretty new feature on most campuses. The business school on most campuses is usually a pretty recent addition compared to the other schools. And strategic management itself is a pretty new scientific field of study. And it is a scientific field of study. Because in strategic management, we use statistical methods, we use all the methods of science to try to figure out how companies can have a sustainable competitive advantage. I mean, that's what it is. We develop hypotheses, we test them, and so forth. So we do everything that other fields of studies do, but this is pretty new. And it's applied. We don't really develop much on our own, but we borrow lots of things from other disciplines. We borrow lots of theories from economics, from sociology, from psychology. Those are three of the big ones. We borrow those and we say, hey, is there something we can borrow here that's going to help us to make this organization better and maybe help us to have a better performance for this organization? And within that field of strategic management, they've developed what we might say two different schools of thought. Two different major ideas of how companies might be able to get ahead. So really what we're talking about here, the stage we set last time, was that it's pretty tough out there. It's hard. Most companies don't do well. That's the fact. But then there are a few that seem to do extremely well, right? Have a sustainable competitive advantage. So why is it that most firms don't do well? Everybody wants to do well. Why can't everyone be above average? Wouldn't that be great if all companies could make above normal profits? But they can't because everyone is competing. They're competing on several fronts. They're competing for customers, oftentimes within the same industry. They're competing for resources. They're competing for employees. Everybody wants to get the best employees, the best resources. They're competing for the best locations, although that's becoming less of a thing now in our virtual economy. But for retail shops, if you have a great location, then that gives you an advantage. All this competition means that there's pressure on the profits of companies, pushing down that profitability. And so over time, in the field of strategic management, we've had a couple of theories that have developed. Again, this conceptually, how can a firm beat the competition we have two theories. Number one, I'm going to call it the IO model. IO stands for Industrial Organization Economics. It comes from, as you might have guessed, economics, from a specific field of economics, industrial organization. This is an old field of economics that it originated back in the 1920s and the 1930s during the Great Depression. And a lot of the major research from economics took place further into the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And then when strategic management came along as a field of study, a lot of the people that were teaching the first strategy courses in business schools were actually economists, IO economists. So this is the first one. We're going to call it the IO model. Okay, it's the older one. But then lately, as business schools began to develop on their own, we had another school of thought come, and I'm going to call this one RBV. All right, RBV stands for, as you can see, resource-based view. Resource-based view comes along and it says, hey, you know what? This is a different way of looking at things. And as you might guess, it looks at resources. For someone that hasn't really given this a lot of thought, it might seem a bit obvious. But it takes a different view, and I'm going to try to explain these two different views against each other as a way of showing you how these two views actually, they don't really compete. They're talking about the same thing. It's about how a firm can come up with a sustainable competitive advantage, but they just approach it from different viewpoints. So the first one, the IO model. And what does IO stand for? Yeah, industrial organization. Industrial organization, it comes from a field of economics. I guess you could say this is still the mainstream view of economics, the industrial organization view of economics. So, IO economists, my little guy is in the way up here. I'm going to pull this down here in the middle. Okay, that's a little bit better. IO economists, remember back to your Econ 101 course, or actually probably your 102 course, your microeconomics course, your foundation course. And once you looked at market structures, you probably remember something called perfect competition, and monopolistic competition, and oligopoly, and monopoly. Those are the four market structures that you study in your intro to economics course. So, if you remember these firms, what really gave them their profitability in some cases was the environment. Those firms that were competing in a perfectly competitive market, right? Perfect competition. Zero profits. Let me be more accurate. Just normal profits. Everybody just made normal profits, but it was impossible for any firm to get ahead because of the competition. And with monopolistic competition, it was also zero profits in most cases, although there were some chances for some differentiation, some chances for a little bit of profit. It's not until we get into oligopoly and monopoly that we began to see profits. So, to make a long story short, the external environment, particularly the industry environment, is a big factor in the profitability according to this IO model. All right. So if you're wanting to get a profit and you're thinking in IO terms, you would want to study the external environment, especially in the industry environment, and then you want to go to an attractive industry. Then you formulate a strategy based on that industry. Then you develop your assets and skills so that you can fulfill that strategy. Then you implement that strategy, and then there's nothing guaranteed here, all right? This is difficult. It's still a process of work and difficulty, but ta-da! The end result is if you're successful, you get superior return. Okay, and since this is a model, and it is a model, it's called the IO model, it makes some assumptions, all right? Again, this is a big difference between economics and management. In economics, if you've taken your economics courses with Professor Cherry, Professor McAvoy, lots of our great economists here at App State. They're all the time making assumptions. Let's assume, first off, that people are rational or whatever. Lots of assumptions. We normally don't do that in management. We just go in there and we try to start figuring things out, right? This is the most theoretical of all of our topics, and so this is a model. And so we have some assumptions with the IO model. First one is, and this is a big one, the external environment. What's out there? What are the opportunities? What are the dangers? What are the risks? What are the costs? Right? What are the threats, opportunities that are out there? That's the main factor. So the first thing we want to do when we're trying to, let's suppose, start a business is we want to find a great opportunity. Where's the best place to make money? And that's in the external environment. So we're looking out the window to try to figure out what's going on. Second assumption, resources are pretty much similar. Let me pull my guy up here for just a moment. Yeah, resources are within a particular industry are pretty much similar, and this leads to similar strategies. Land is land, labor is labor, capital is capital. And so, other things equal, we would expect companies to move in the same direction. Resources are also highly mobile. If I can make more money in another industry, in another company, then I'm going to leave and go to that place. Capital can move freely. The last assumption is that managers are rational and act in the firm's best interest by trying to maximize profits. So, again, all of this sets the stage for where profits are going to come from. And so basically, what we're setting up for in this model is that it's going to depend on the industry. It's going to depend on the niche. Is there some way we could get in there and protect ourselves from competition in a little niche so that we can have above average returns, right? First one that gets in there might be able to erect some barriers to entry. They might be able to differentiate their product. First mover advantage might set them apart, and so they might be able to leverage that into something that allows them to have an above average return. The second model, remember that one is called the RBV model. RBV stands for, yeah, that's right, resource-based view. The resource-based view model of above average returns. Now, the first step from somebody, a manager thinking in this type of model, thinking in the resource-based model view, is that I need to find my resources. What do I have? What's unique about me as a person? What's unique about our organization? Do we have some sort of special talent? Do we have some special technology? Do we have a special location? Do we have whatever? Some special, unique resources. The term that we're going to start thinking about in Chapter 3 is core competence. What is our core competence? And then from that, you move off into the next step is developing some capability with that special resources. Then the next step of that is you outperform your rivals in terms of competitive advantage. It's only the fourth location that you find an industry. So you found out exactly what it is you could do and what you could do uniquely and better than everybody else. And then you think, okay, now that we know what we can do, how do we apply this in an industry? And then you select a strategy that will help to make those superior returns. And then the outcome is the same as in the last model. Ta-da! Yeah, the superior returns. What are the assumptions behind the resource-based model? Well, this is a big one. Remember how the IO model assumed that resources were pretty much similar? The resource-based model relaxes that assumption. Yeah, sure, labor is labor, land is land and capital is capital. But, you know, there's only one, something like talent. There's only one, for example, Steve Jobs. There's only one, or there used to be only one, Kobe Bryant. There's only one LeBron James. There still is only one Michael Jordan, although he's no longer playing. But, you know, talent is something that God does not distribute evenly. Let's face it, I'm not as talented a basketball player as LeBron James. Yeah, hard to believe, right? But it's true. So, no matter how hard I would try, if I'd say, yeah, no matter how, I'm going to work harder than everybody else in the NBA, dudes, I'm only 5'7". Wouldn't work, right? So, resources are different. Organizations also get different cultures over time. And also, a lot of my research looks at differences between Chinese and American management, comparative management across countries. We now understand that certain countries are better in certain industry because of national cultures. I think that a lot of cross-cultural managers or people that study comparative management like myself would agree with that. So the first one is, difference is that they assume that resources are different. Second one, firms develop unique capabilities based on how they combine and use those resources. So firms come up with different core competencies, we might say. Third one, resources and certain capabilities are not highly mobile across firms. And this one, you know, let's think about this. All right, let's suppose that you graduate from App State and you are doing okay in your little town, but you come up with another opportunity that you can make more money in Charlotte, although some of you may be from Charlotte, but let's suppose that you're from Watauga County, some meat camp or someplace where there's not a lot of industry. Well, yeah, you can move around. But what about if there's another opportunity that comes up in, say, United Arab Emirates? Would you go there? Maybe not, right? And my home state is actually West Virginia. And people say, well, you know, the coal mines there have done quite badly for the last 20 years. But they won't. The people that live in some of those places refuse to move for whatever reason. It's difficult to retrain them. They've got ties there, and so labor may not necessarily be totally mobile. So is labor mobile? Yes, it is, up to a certain point. Is it sticky and immobile? Well, yeah, that's true too. So these two different views of the world come down to thinking about something like, are resources mobile? Can capital move freely across borders? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. So, you know, it's hard to say one is right and one is wrong. So whenever it comes down to looking at where a competitive advantage comes from, the IO model or the RBV model, we might want to look at the underlying assumptions. Fourth assumption for resource-based model is that it's the differences in resources and capabilities are the basis of the firm's competitive advantage rather than the industry characteristics. All right. So remember, in the IO model, they said, oh, it depends on the industry characteristics. It depends on finding the right niche. It doesn't matter so much on your talent. It depends more on where you are, where you're competing, the environment. Resource-based view looks more internal. It depends on what's special about our organization, what's special about our culture, what's special about our company that gives us a core competence that allows us to do something unique. Okay, so important point here. I keep getting in my own way. Important point here. Hey, these models are not coming up with different outcomes. They're just different ways of explaining, in the face of competition, where everyone is trying to get ahead. Everyone is trying to jump up and get ahead and get a profit, get a leg up on the other guy, the other company, right? So they just have different explanations for how that might happen. Okay? The IO model says that it depends on the industry. It depends on the environment. I need to jump into what right now, for example, an IO person would say you've got to be in technology. Right at this moment, as this coronavirus is crushing our economy, it seems as though the companies that are doing well are the technology companies. I was reading just today on Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal, I forget which, that if it weren't for about 5 companies, that actually the S&P 500 would still be down. You might have noticed that the S&P 500 recently popped, woke up, so we've erased all the losses from the S&P 500. So in other words, if you bought into an S&P 500 ETF, right, and back in March it crashed, you lost about 30% of your money or so. Well, guess what? Now it's all been made up. But that makeup has been because of those 5 companies. There are 5 companies that people sometimes talk about, the FANG companies. I know it sounds scary. FANG. F-A-A-N-G. FANG stands for, what does F stand for? Facebook. A, Apple. Apple just hit $2 trillion. The first $2 trillion company. F-A. Another A. Amazon. Amazon.com. N. Netflix. Netflix is still flying high. Actually, the coronavirus made it explode out. It looked like for a while there, it looked like Disney, the Disney Channel, I forget what it's called, Disney, Hulu, there's some competitors. But Netflix still continues to burst out. And G. Yeah, you guessed it, Google. Actually, the company is called Alphabet. So the FANG companies, right now, it looks like the IO explanation for that would be, hey, you've got to be in the right industry. And right now, the right industry is in technology. That's where the money is. Resource-based person might look at this and say, hey, what you need to develop, and this is kind of a same way, or a different way of looking at the same thing. What you need to develop is you need to develop resources that are going to give you a unique advantage. And right now, that seems to be in the area of technology. You need to have a Steve Jobs. You need to have the tech guys that know how to do that sort of thing. Unless you do that, then you're not going to be able to have a sustainable competitive advantage. In the case of Amazon, for example, they could say, well, Amazon.com, they have this network now that they've built up. They've got these unique distribution centers. They've got their logistics are very well developed, and it allows them to have overnight delivery. They're one of the few companies that can do that. So this one would look at the external environment, and this one would look at the internal environment, but both are coming up with the same thing. So looking at both of these side by side, here we have the IO model, here we have the RBV model. And the IO model, the 5 steps are, first, we got to look at the environment. We got to look out there. Where are the threats? Where are the opportunities? Aha! That's where we need to go. We need to find that attractive industry and move in that direction. Then we come up with a strategy. Then we have the asset and skills. Then we have the implementation. And hopefully, if everything goes right, remember there are no guarantees, but ta-da, we get these superior returns. Resource-based view, we get the same destination, but a different explanation of how we get there. What do I have? What do we have that's unique? What do we have that's special? After we have we've identified our special after we have identified our special resources, we develop a particular capability. This will help us to have a competitive advantage. Once we know what that competitive advantage is, we move into an attractive industry. After we have an attractive industry, we've got to come up with a strategy. And hopefully, if everything works out, again, Ta-da! The superior return. Let me see if I can give you an example to make this more clear. You might have heard of a guy named Michael Dell, who founded Dell Computer and has been around for a long time. Well, if you look at the stories of how he managed to get into that position, he started the company in his dorm room at the University of Texas in Austin. And they started off by first doing a scan of the external environment. This was at the beginning of the PC revolution, so this was some years ago, which, by the way, Michael Dell and I are just about the exact same age. We're almost the exact same age, like a year's difference. So I've been following his career for some time. And so, yeah, so they started looking at the external environment, and they came up with an attractive industry. At that time, computer sales were booming. Right now, they're not. It's a horrible industry to be in now because it's a declining industry. They came up with a strategy. They came up with a direct order model. They were the first ones that allowed people to order their computers directly rather than have to go to a shop and buy them off the shelf. Then they put together their assets and skills. They put together manufacturing and so forth, strategy implementation, and then superior returns, right? Now let me give you another example of a company that I like to use as an example. A little company called 3M. MMM. What does 3M stand for? What does 3M stand for? Anybody? Yeah, that's right. Minneapolis Mining and Manufacturing. 3M Company. It was founded in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And rumor has it that they are very picky about the industries that they go into. They won't go into just any industry. What they do first is, what's 3M good at? What do they do? Adhesives, materials. 3M, what are some of their products? Scotch tape, sandpaper, different types of adhesives and glue, right? They also have Thinsulate, a few other things. But they're focused on a pretty tight batch of technology, and they try to dominate in that area. So what they try to do is, okay, what do we have here? Well, we've got the world's best adhesive materials. Well, what can we do with that? Well, what about street signs? Yeah, they make street signs. They make the adhesives that you stick on a sign that's reflective, that says yield or whatever. A lot of that comes from 3M. So once we've come up with a capability, can we do this better than anybody else? Yeah. So what are we going to do? We go into street signs, we go into strategy, superior returns. So one is using one approach and one is using another approach. So yeah, IO stands for industrial organization. RBV stands for resource-based view. And what's the main difference between these two? Anybody? Yeah, that's basically it, right? It's industrial organization is more external. Comes from neoclassical economics. It says industry structure, industry concentration ratios, those types of things are the big factor that influences profitability. RBV, a little bit newer. This one really came about, it's been around really since, I guess, Adam Smith or so. It's been around as long as economics has been about, but only since business schools have been about have we had this new one called RBV. 1990s really is when people began to use that term. Resource-based view was in the early 1990s. And it says that it depends more on the skills. And actually, to be honest, as business people, as future managers, everybody in here, or everybody in our class, hopefully is going to be a future manager someday. This one is a little bit more, generous to what managers do. It gives them more credit because this one puts more emphasis on formulating unique strategies and what managers actually do. So, I hope you find that somewhat interesting. I'm going to say something right now that's maybe a little bit controversial. And get back up here. And this might make you a little bit mad, but I want you to challenge me. All right? As a management professor, I buy into the theories. I drink the Kool-Aid. I go to the conferences. And so I'm going to state this out there controversially. All right, this is what I'm going to say. You can call this Michael's Law of Competitive Advantage if you want to. In summary, in competitive markets, there are only two ways that an organization can make sustainable, above average returns with an acceptable amount of risk. One, to have a protectable niche, have something in the industry or the environment that protects you from competition. All right? It might be government implemented. There's going to be some sort of barrier to entry. You might have first mover advantage that has allowed you to dominate a market, and so it's kind of kept out competitors. That's one. Two is if you have rare, valuable resources and capabilities that cannot be imitated or substituted away. So what do you think? I'm saying that it has to be one or the other. There's no other way. If you can show me another way that doesn't fit into either one of these, I'll buy you a beer. All right? Virtually. I'll buy a beer, have it shipped over to your house. We can drink it together on Zoom. Let me give you another example. These are two behemoths, two giants of American industry and technology. Microsoft and the founder Bill Gates, and Apple and the founder Steve Jobs. These are two U.S. companies with similar history. They've kind of been in competition. The iOS has been in competition with Windows, at least in the PC market. Apple has kind of left Microsoft in the dust when it comes to tablets as well as phones. But let's say, at least as for the computer industry, which is really both of them had their start in the computer industry, they're competing on their operating systems as well as some other things. I'm going to say that it's easier to explain Microsoft's success with an I/O perspective as a professor. Whereas I'm going to say that it's easier for me, anyway, to explain Apple's success with an RBV perspective. Do you agree? Yes or no? See, right now I wish we had a classroom because we could have a good discussion about this. Let me explain why I'm saying that. Microsoft came to dominate the PC industry with almost an inferior product because they became the industry standard. And also the fact that they only produced software meant that lots of hardware producers could use their software as well. And especially in business, until recently, Microsoft really dominated because they just had a barrier to entry. Over the years, we had other Linux, we had different operating systems that a lot of people thought were better, but they just couldn't break in because once something becomes an institutionalized standard, it makes it really hard for somebody else to come in. So I think Microsoft kind of became filthy rich because of barriers to entry. They kind of got their first mover advantage. They dominated and they became kind of an institutionalized, accepted operating system that if you wanted to collaborate with other people, you had to have it as well. But Apple, on the other hand, Apple is a company that has been kind of an outsider, the quintessential outsider, in that they have made their mark in creating products and really, you might have heard of the term creative destruction. They've created whole new industries because they are just super duper innovative. And that innovation stems back to special resources. Because of their very dynamic and charismatic and visionary leader, they were able to attract some of the best minds in innovation, in usability, and so forth. And so they pushed all of this into one package. And so it's really a unique bundle of resources. And they were able to use that bundle of resources. Well, they didn't do so. They did quite well in the computer industry, but they struggled a little bit. But then later, they've begun to dominate other industries, the tablet market, and of course the phone market, and now online and lots of other things. So, does that make sense? What I'm saying, that as a management professor, if someone was going to ask me to explain Microsoft's success, both of these companies, I think we could argue, has a sustainable competitive advantage. Microsoft's sustainable competitive advantage is due more to the environment, whereas I believe that, at least for me, it's easier to explain Apple's success looking at their unique resources and their core competencies. So, right, last little thing here. Hey, SWOT analysis. You've heard of SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Yeah, I know it seems simple, but actually, this is a strong little package if you do it right, because it's very comprehensive. It looks at both internal, right? Strengths and weaknesses are, as an individual or as an organization, what is it about us that's particularly strong or particularly weak? It's also external. What is it about us in our particular industry where we have certain opportunities or threats? And it's also positive and negative. Strengths and opportunities are the positive aspect. Weaknesses and threats are the negative aspect. So if you do a good job on a SWOT analysis, you're covering all the bases. So that's not something to sneeze at. So does anybody have any questions? Again, if you do have any questions, please go to the discussion forum and post them there. All right? Until next time, this is Michael. Thanks for joining me.